Research suggests that up to 50% of patients with an eating disorder will abuse alcohol or an illicit substance, compared with 9% of the population. We really don't talk about this enough until today. We've got 3 courageous women joining us today for a conversation about how their disordered eating habits have tied into their addiction and recovery from alcohol. The two are closely intertwined, and if you're struggling with both, it helps so much to understand how one affects the other. Each of these women has fought her unique battle courageously and has gained wisdom and compassion to share with the rest of the world. Stay tuned for an honest, very real conversation about navigating an eating disorder alongside alcohol use disorder.
Welcome to Through the Glass Recovery podcast, where we believe that connection is the opposite of addiction, vulnerability is the antidote to shame, and that recovery isn't just rewarding, but it's also a lot of fun. We're your hosts, Julie and Steve. Listen as we get together with friends to shed light on the hard things, talk about the other side of addiction, and how we create a life so full there's no space left for alcohol.
If this conversation resonates with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How have eating disorders and alcohol use been connected in your life? Join us in our Facebook group or over Instagram, where we're continuing the discussion. Recovery can feel isolating, but you're not alone. And talking about these connections is a powerful step to healing. Come share your experience, ask questions, or just listen in. We're in this together. Find us at facebook.com/groups/throughtheglassrecovery or at throughtheglassrecovery on Instagram. We can't wait to connect with you.
All right, welcome everybody to this very special episode. I'm super excited to have these ladies with us, and this is a topic we have never covered before, and it's one that needs to be talked about more. So I am thrilled to have these 3 gals with us to have this conversation. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves as we always do, and I'm going to pick on Antia because you've done this enough that you know how it's done. So,
Okay. All right, I'll go first. I'm Antia. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I have 2 children that are teenagers, and I'm married. I'm 47, and I am sober since 3 years, 1 month, and 2 weeks. So, yay. And I have a long history with eating problems, eating disorder, and it's up and down and up and down. But currently, I'm doing really well. So,
awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I know I hear that 3 years now. Like I met Ansia in her very first week of sobriety. And so it is so cool to be able to say we've known each other for over 3 years now.
Yep.
that's right.
Really neat. All right, Miss Brittany, I'm going to let you go next.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Brittany. I am 32 years old. I am from South Kingstown, Rhode Island. My sobriety date is January 29th, 2017. Truly grateful for that amount of time. My abstinence date in my eating disorder is August 9th, 2022. So as you can tell, that was a little harder for me to get. And I'm just really grateful to be here and to share on this topic today.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you back. It's been a long time, so it's neat to see you again. All right, and last but not least, we've got Karen.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for the blueprint to follow. My name's Karen Clark. I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm back here now for 2 more months, and then I moved to Portugal in April. So that's a pretty intense experience I'm walking through right now on a number of levels, and I'm really grateful for the strength of the program and sobriety to be able to walk through it. Let's see. I'm quite a bit older than the rest of the group, and I'm 71, just turned 71, and I got sober the first time in May of 1984, and then stayed sober for quite a while and had my daughter, got married, had my daughter, went through the first few years of her life just fine. And then we decided to move to Wisconsin for her to grow up, for Madison, Wisconsin. And when I got there, I realized no one knew that I ever drank alcoholically. So I figured as long as I held the glass with my pinky extended and it was crystal, I'd be fine. Didn't work out that well. So I have now been sober for almost 11 years this time. And thank you very much. I'm very grateful. I know not everybody gets back to it.
Hmm.
So I'm grateful. My eating issues started before drinking for sure in adolescence. So I'll bring all of that in while we're talking. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing all of that. And so happy that you're back in recovery and back here with us today and all of that good stuff. So, before we even start this, I want to thank you all for having the courage to show up and talk about this because I know it can be really tough. It's also a really important conversation that deserves more voices. And the longer we spend time with women in recovery, the more we meet women who have struggled with both disordered eating and alcohol misuse. And often they tell us that the two are closely linked, that recovery from one requires the same work as recovery from the other. So we would love to hear what you have to share. How did you develop a healthier relationship with food? What do you still struggle with? How has disordered eating played a part in your recovery from alcohol addiction? We're going to give you guys the floor and let you take this any direction you want to, because you guys know what this conversation needs to look like. We are just here to share the platform and give some space to this topic.
I feel emotional about this because I feel like it is a vulnerable thing to talk about. Like I just got the chills. And I just thought I would share that because, like Julie, I respect both or all three of you for showing up and making this a topic of conversation. Go for it.
That's
Whoever.
that's what I just wanted to say, that it's actually easier for me to talk about my drinking than it is to open up to talk more in detail about my eating disorder. And even within my family, where I promised myself I won't have lies, I will never lie to the kids. I will always be open, and they know very well that I do recovery work because of drinking. I have not disclosed to them that I had for a long time a really bad eating disorder, and still trying to figure out when a good time is to actually break the news on that. So it is definitely a harder topic to open up about for sure. Mm.
Well, I'd be happy to share because my eating disorder was critical to my drinking ultimately. My eating disorder started when I was in puberty. Like so many women, that's a big trigger. And my mom was an alcoholic. Well, both my parents were alcoholic. They just did it differently, very differently. My mom was a very serious alcoholic, stayed at home, sat and drank. And I was in a lot of pain as a young person. And I had no idea what I was doing, but the way that I got through it was food, and especially sugar. When I was initially in recovery for adult children issues, I used to joke and say the four food groups in my life are white flour, fat, white sugar, and coffee, because I would subsist on those kinds of things, and a huge craving for ice cream. So one of the things that's important about that, I'll get to in a minute, but my mom died of the disease when I was 20 years old and I was a senior in college. And it was at that point that food wasn't enough and I started drinking. And and then I coupled it with the food issue, and I had also learned how to starve because, of course, as a 20 something, I also wanted to be cute, right? And it wasn't cute when I was 45 pounds heavier than I wanted to be, especially as short as I am. I'm taller than my sister, though, I have to say that. And it's what I've seen over and over and over in women is how much the food placates us, not only emotionally, but it also keeps us silent. And I think that's an imperative piece of this. It's the only way I could swallow all my feelings. And I have lots more to say, but I really would love to hear other people's experiences because this is so vital to recovery. And one of the things I still see at meetings, just saw it this morning if you're in 12-step recovery, is when people are in charge of bringing snacks, the whole counter was loaded with donuts and baked goods. There wasn't a fruit or a vegetable or an actual food anywhere in the room. And it's heartbreaking to me. Okay. And I closed this big hole in my face and I'm quiet.
I'll share a little bit. Thank you, both of you. My eating disorder started when I was 8, and it's interesting because I can specifically remember, like, a core memory when my eating disorder started and when my drug addiction and alcohol addiction started, very vividly. With my eating disorder, I was 8 years old, and I was at my annual physical with my mom at the doctor's, and he pulled her aside, and he said, "Your daughter is too heavy for her weight and for her age and her height, and she needs to start watching what she's eating." And all I heard as a little kid was, "There is something wrong with me. I am a mistake, and I will never be good enough." And I wanted to just numb that and fill that hole in the soul. And I think a lot of alcoholics can identify with that feeling of trying to fill that hole in the soul. And both my eating disorder and my alcohol use and abuse, it started from a trigger based on my body. When I was 21 years old, I was roofied and I was sexually assaulted, and I wanted to get out of my body. I wanted to numb out. I didn't want to feel anything. Once again, I just wanted to almost disappear. And I'm guessing we'll touch on that a little later with anorexia and all that. But that's more where mine started.
Yeah. I do think that the eating disorder and the drinking goes along so often because it's a response to trauma and a response to stress. And I learned over many years of therapy that eating disorders often have something to do with control, that it's something in your life is not in your control and you're trying desperately to get control. I started when I was 14 to restrict and be obsessed with what I eat and how much I eat. And my mom was very controlling of me. And so she was forcing me to not do this and eat this and that. And I had to. And so then I found ways to get rid of the food and develop bulimia because of it. And I think that's where the shame starts because who wants to talk about having bulimia? I think it's so normalized to talk about dieting and watching what you eat that I actually get very annoyed and upset that it's so normalized that even kids get served lunch with low fat this and low salt that and low salt and I mean like low calorie and all of this stuff that this is supposed to be good. Like every year my health assessment dings me for filling out that I eat uh, whole milk products and that it's a risk for obesity. And I just get really upset that this is such a diet culture we live in when in the end um that yeah is unhealthy to live that way and to constantly restrict what you're eating. But yet the other side of it, when you develop an eating disorder out of anxiety over gaining weight and then purge, then you can't talk about any of this because that's really bad and disgusting and then you're sick. And it took me a long time to understand that this binging and purging cycle that I was doing was just as much of a trauma response and me numbing out and figuring out a way to deal with emotions. Then once I worked hard to quit that, to binge and to purge, but then I replaced it with alcohol. And I also didn't realize that I just switched it around to the next problematic coping, so to speak, and thought, now this is okay because who doesn't drink when they're in college and parties, and that's okay. My parents drink. Like now, I don't have to feel shitty about myself. I don't have to be ashamed. I'm not binging and purging anymore. And just with time, I realized, and it was exactly like this. I stopped drinking, and then came the eating back. Like it was just, to me, eye-opening now in hindsight to see how there was this mechanism in place that helped me cope with really difficult emotions. And I felt crappy about me as a person and didn't understand that this is all I had in the moment to respond and to work with, because I didn't learn how to deal with any of the emotions in a healthier way than this. And that's how I think eating disorders and alcohol are so linked, that it's a response to trauma, a response to not wanting to feel. And just the best thing that comes up that's driven often by our culture, um, that we do these things and engage in these things, like wanting to be thin, wanting to control what you eat, and wanting to be acceptable. So you drink because who doesn't drink? And then a lot of things go on in secret that are in excess then. Yeah.
I never thought about eating disorders that way, in that with alcohol, like you're expected to drink, right? As a society, you are expected to drink. But if you drink too much, then you're ashamed of it. Then you're bad, you're looked down on. I have never thought about eating disorders the same way, but that is so true. You're expected to diet, and you're expected to always be weight conscious, and like it's normal, and people would be shocked if you weren't thinking about your weight. But then if you take it one step further, then it's suddenly something that you feel shame about. I've never put that together quite that way before, but that's really, really interesting how similar those are.
Oh, they're so similar, and that the process of it and the shame around it also mirrors the shame that we're already carrying. It's like
Mhm.
action itself becomes shameful, but the shame was what triggered it in the first place. It's just such a um it's so painful when you're in it and you think there's something wrong with you, and it's so obvious when you can get beyond it enough to be able to see that it was because of the environment you were in and what the world was saying. I remember when I was doing research on compulsive overeating and bulimia as well, and um, there were so many studies. This was back in the 70s and 80s. There were so many studies about American girls starting to diet and think they were too fat in the third grade. In third grade. And I'm sure it's still true. And the other thing that I heard people say that I think is it just raises a smidge of ire in me, is that we're told to eat food that isn't good for us at all so that we'll keep our weight low, like low fat dairy. There's an entire mechanical process that happens that takes nutrition out of the food to make it low fat, and yet you're doing a good job if you're doing that. So health is never, ever the actual I didn't do that. Health is never, ever the objective. It's being thin, it's fitting in, it's being attractive, so which is why it's so prevalent among women, and I know men have their own pain around body image and also around, um their own eating disorders, but it just shows up for us so much more. And then exercise, you should exercise. So what do? We go at it 125% and over exercise and then stop and do nothing and then start again. Yeah, our culture, our family systems trigger it usually. Our culture supports it, and and we're oblivious. It's all behind here. We don't see it or get it. It's just so painful. This is bringing up a lot of emotion for me that I haven't felt in a long time. Long time. So I really thank you for doing this, because I know it is an angst and a pain for so many women, and there's not the permission to talk about it always.
I'm often very surprised how much I can relate to people struggling with urges when we have meetings and we talk about, how we're doing, and people say they struggle with urges to drink, and we're brainstorming ideas how to help that person to overcome these urges. And to me, I go back to how did I overcome my urges to binge and purge? Like it was the stronger urge for me to have to overcome, because you got to eat every day. You got to find a way to somehow come back to a normal intake of food and a healthy diet. And the first, the first phase of recovery is super hard because your body is not used to processing food anymore or in a normal way, or your whole hunger cues and feeling full is off. And so I often see the parallels when I meet someone who's struggling in the early stages of recovery from alcohol, with like, how do I get through the evenings when I have urges to drink, with how I set and like fought for every minute to not purge or to not continue to eat and throw myself into a binge, or um and based on that, overcoming that, I had then an easier time learning to quit drinking, because I first got rid of the eating disorder, and I knew already strategies to overcome those urges, and they weren't for me as strong for quitting drinking. They were there too, but it was a whole different level of urges when I had to deal with eating and not binging and purging, especially the purging. It was it was horrible, and it prevents me from ever wanting to go back to a phase like that, because it was so hard to get over the binging and purging. Uh, I'm so thankful that I made it through this and that I'm not dealing with this anymore. It is such a um, quality of life issue, like that you can't function normally with um, being able to eat like everyone else. Even like I remember we were on a class trip and I had so much an urge to binge, and I had no access to food. Like I would ask others for snacks, for anything I could just eat to get there. How embarrassing that was to deal with these urges in basically public, so to speak. And yeah, I just I'm really glad that I'm not in that life anymore of fighting these urges. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. The way I kind of describe it, you kind of touched on like how triggering even the refeeding process can be when your body's getting used to feeling that fullness again, and how that can be sometimes distorted. When I'm in a meeting, I do touch on my eating disorder just because it led me to the 12 steps. I wouldn't be in the rooms had it not been for that. And what I tell them is the best way I can describe it to you is when you eat a huge Thanksgiving dinner and you are uncomfortably full, and picture that 4 times a day until you get quote unquote used to it. And it is the most triggering experience. And you almost feel less than human while you're going through it. But I think we are also blessed as addicts and alcoholics because we have a drive within us that a lot of people don't. And when that drive can be driven toward recovery, there's really no stopping it. But so my claims are recovering anorexic, bulimic, and compulsive overeater. What about you guys?
I was anorexic and bulimic. Yeah.
Mm.
And I was a compulsive overeater, and the only type of um, bulimic behavior I ever did was exercise, over exercise, and not a lot of that actually. Yep.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I also had issues with exercising from time to time over my thing.
One of the greatest gifts of recovery to me is developing a healthy relationship with your body. Actually, I can remember being on a table in a therapeutic body session treatment. And I said out loud as my joke, I'd rather drive to the bathroom than walk because I hate exercise so much. Ha ha ha. And she had her hand on my back and she said, that isn't true. And at the time, I thought, ooh, that doesn't feel comfortable. But in hindsight, what I got is I was that disconnected from my own body. Get so disconnected. I would look at it in the mirror and hate what I saw, but I would absolutely not know what my body was telling me. The only thing I knew was craving and not wanting to feel, although I wasn't conscious of that. And that's so much a piece of eating disorder. That's different than drinking because that becomes its own compulsion. But that, yeah, I can still feel the grief. And it's a remarkable thing that we're sitting here talking about it in the past. Yes. Instead of in the present, and how lucky we are. And how much I want that for other people, mostly, especially women.
Absolutely. I think
Really quick, I'm just going to ask Karen, you talked about you were so disconnected from your body.
Yes.
And I don't know if you can answer this or not, what does it look like to reconnect, to get back in touch with your body in a way that you're connected again?
It's been a really slow journey for me and some of it isn't conscious, like you just said. But I do remember after that, and of course, we talked about it a couple of times. She ended up being a bigger part of my life than just the body work. Um, but one of the things I think that made the biggest difference was a little separate from the eating issue itself or the exercise issue. It was learning how to feel again, learning what was going on inside my body that was about. I had a great therapist who, when I said, I don't know what I feel awful. That's how I feel. And she said, make it simple: mad, sad, glad, scared. Every feeling fits in there somewhere or is a combination. And I used that for at least 2 years. I'd say, okay, am I mad, sad, glad, or scared? And then ultimately, it became an experience of being able to feel the nuance. Like, I'm feeling shame, and as a result of that, I'm really sad for me. And all those pieces ended up leading me to deeper connection with my body. Like, I don't know about anybody else, but recently there's been just a little bit of tension in the environment, just a smidge, in the nation and the world. And I went out and bought half a gallon of ice cream. I haven't done that in so long, I can't even tell you. But when I asked myself after I had had the first serving, which is, let's see if I can get half the package into a bowl. I asked, does that feel good? And the answer was no. No, it doesn't. And did it make the world any better? No. So we learn to be more discerning as we get more connected to our bodies too, even if that impulse shows up. I don't know if that answered your question, and the other thing that made a huge difference is starting to move and feeling how good it actually felt. Like how good I felt when I actually did go out and walk for a half an hour, or when I started doing yoga or dancing. I hadn't danced in so long because when I was drunk, the joke used to be drink, get drunk, fall down, no problem. And I love to dance, and feeling myself in my body dancing was so heavenly in my 30s. It still is. It still is. So I think all of those things that are about reclaiming ourselves also reconnect us to our.
Yeah. That's a fantastic answer. And that, yeah, there's so much substance and I think things for people to grasp onto. And so much of that is similar to at least for me, in my recovery from alcohol, the learning how to feel and all of that. Brittany, I totally interrupted you with that question. Do you remember what you were going to say? I'm sorry.
No, but I can touch on what Karen said. For me, I did a lot of body scanning meditations and what's called body mapping. And I'm a substance use counselor here, and I do it with my patients, and it works just as well. Um, but what I have them do is I have them draw an outline of their body, and then I have them check in. Where do I feel fear? Where do I feel anger, pain, joy? And so for me, like, for example, fear is all in my head, all in my head. So I would write fear in my outline. And then joy would be in my heart. Sometimes pain is in the heart too. Guilt and shame are usually in the belly. Usually. Anger is usually all over me sometimes. But it's just really interesting to see the process of both and how they can check in with themselves. And now I'm at the point where my body will feel something, an emotion, before my brain. And it has been such a useful tool. And this is still happening now. It's still blowing my mind. Like, for example, a couple days ago, I woke up. I'm like, what is this feeling? Oh, this is weird. I'm like, oh, I'm happy. Like, like, no, you're not manic. You're happy. Like and it's still surprising, but to me, I never want to lose that gift of excitement or the type of therapy it's giving me with therapy.
I have not yet really been able to do that well. I'm still learning how to feel. I swing to pretty extreme emotions, and of course then I can feel them. But I'm trying to figure out how I can identify them when they start and not once they're all extreme, because then I have a hard time dealing with them. And so it's the work in progress for me to kind of check in and figure out where am I at when it's not extreme. I can tell you when I'm really angry, but when I'm so angry that not even breathing helps anymore to get me more regulated, or I can be super happy and super sad, and like all these extreme emotions are okay, but anything that's more just middle ground, I have a hard time. And especially when you say how you feel it in your body, that's completely undoable for me. I just can't figure it out. I don't know what my body, like, I don't have that connection yet. I'm trying to work on this, but it's super hard for me. And it's something I don't like to do either. I can feel the resistance, how I don't want to feel my body. And so I know that there is still work to do. And it's, yeah, I'm, slowly moving forward and hope that one day I can be better at this. It's a long road when you haven't learned this as a kid. You were told not to feel anything. It was not okay. You were always expected to be just happy, and anything else was scolded. And so you learn it to shove it under the rug, and you're not supposed to be angry, upset, disappointed, or any negative thing. And so where is it supposed to come from? I'm still standing here trying to figure it out. I'm really trying to teach my kids to feel their emotions, because you actually have this ability as a kid. If you don't, as a parent, ruin it and take it away, they can feel just fine. I can see it. My kids know what they're feeling, how they're doing, and I can just be there validating it and cheering them on. Yeah, you feel really upset. I would too. Or it's okay for you to feel upset and you still have to do this. Like, I don't have to negate those feelings for them just because it might be uncomfortable for me to deal with them that way. And I think that was the big issue at home. My mom wasn't comfortable with any feeling. And so nobody got to have any feelings other than some positive feelings. And so it's a huge issue for me still to this day. Yeah.
I will say that it took me a lot of time. I was introduced to this type of therapy 13 years ago, and I probably was able to identify the feelings like I can now, even just starting maybe 2 years ago. So it took me a lot of time. Don't get discouraged. It's a long journey, but
Yeah.
the biggest thing is just don't give up on yourself.
No, I don't. And I realized that I'm really just now, even though I've been in therapy for decades, doing that kind of work because, as I said, when I recovered from eating disorder and I was so proud of myself, I'm not binging, purging anymore. I'm starting to eat normally again. I was drinking instead. Of course, I didn't tell my therapist that. And of course, then we didn't have to deal with any major feelings because that all went under the rug again because I was drinking them away, right? But no, I was so proudly going into therapy saying how I'm not having any symptoms for bulimia anymore. And on the side, I was then drinking a bottle of wine each night, and that, of course, I knew that couldn't have been really the goal either, but I didn't want to mention that, that was then shameful to mention that. And so it's just now since 3 years, I actually, when I started to be sober, was running a lot. So almost to the point where exercise became a little bit of an issue. I tried not to make it. I was aware that, that can be seen as purging. So I used an app where I couldn't see how many calories I burned. Like I was really good about not doing that. But exercise in itself was a numbing procedure for me. Again, I every time I felt angry, every time I was stressed, I would just hit the road and run for a while until I felt fine and came back. And then the emotion was dealt with, but not really in a great way either, because I would check out when I was running and not feel it was like a distraction in a way, just to run and then feel better coming home. Then endorphins kicked in and then I was fine again. But um, it's a pretty fresh thing to now sit with all of this and having to feel it and identify what's going on and dealing with it. Yeah.
And I think so important that there's a recognition that the culture itself, in very open, obvious, and subtle and nefarious ways, celebrates us doing that. Oh, your endorphins will make everything okay again. It is, I really hear that. And it's, we're doing so much. I guess what came up for me is we're doing so much more than recovering ourselves. We actually are becoming countercultural. And
Yes.
it is such a powerful statement for our um, psyches and for I'm a big one still. Back in the day, it was huge for that young child in us that is saying, "I don't want to do this anymore. I've been feeling this all my life," and and we're supporting that by doing these changes incrementally and um, with great courage. Takes great courage to do what you're talking about doing. It's such a gift to listen to.
So, from a male's perspective on the outside, from the outside looking in, because the eating disorder is not anything that it's ever affected me in my life, nor have I really known anyone who has outwardly spoken about it. I have to say it that way because I'm sure I know people that, just like we know someone who has an alcohol problem. If you, it's kind of like that. You know someone, you just don't know someone. Anyways, one of the things that caught me is the similarity, the deep similarity to a response to an uncomfortable emotion with drinking, and that was new to me. That one was one thing I would have never have guessed immediately at all, that was tied, a connection tied to it. I would have tied it to self-image, not not as much as self-worth. Man's view outside, not being able to sit inside of this conversation, which is absolutely beautiful. The one thing, in Karen, you touched on this, is this societal bullshit that exists. I was gonna censor myself, but fuck it. The societal bullshit that comes along with, this is the way a woman is supposed to look.
Yes.
And and whatever messages that you as women get to internalize based on what the media gives you has got to be tough, especially when food is everywhere. So we talk about alcohol being everywhere. Food is something that you have to eat, right? The difference between like the physical, and behavioral addiction sort of things, but still, like food is something you have to eat. That's what you need to sustain yourself. So at the same time, you have this gotta be, and it sounds like this internal battle. Like I need to eat because I need to sustain, but I can't eat the way that I'm eating because it's hurting me.
Well, that's like we've talked about this before, I think in different podcasts, but in a lot of ways, I think that behavioral addictions are more difficult to overcome depending on the behavior than like a substance addiction. With alcohol, you get rid of it. You don't need it. You don't need alcohol to survive. It does not need to be a part of your life. You can choose to remove it completely and you're done. When you look at the more behavioral types of issues, whether it's food or sex or shopping or any of those things that you kind of are required to do in moderation, then you have to find that balance. And it's like you have to walk that line all the time. You don't just get to be done with it and walk away from it. You've got to keep walking the line, I would imagine. Does that sound accurate, girls?
Like
Absolutely. And I just want to touch base on the fact that when you have an eating disorder, especially bulimia, and bulimia is generally the most common that co-occurs with alcohol or comes before alcohol use and abuse. But I work in a treatment center right now, and if someone comes in and they have a history of an eating disorder, I literally have seen a healthcare professional look out the window and say, "Oh, they look healthy," and not treat it like a big deal. It does not get the same recognition as alcohol and substance use. It just don't.
Exactly.
It is so sad.
The other thing that is really true about food issues is you've got really a double whammy because when we are, whether it's compulsive eating, bulimia, we eat foods that we crave because there's a substance in it that cultivates that craving, like sugar. It's one of the reasons that we're talking about alcoholism rather than cocaine or opiates. Not that we haven't done all of the above, some of us, but if one is good, more is better. But the connection between sugar and alcohol is so huge. It's so huge. But in terms of the the eating disorder itself, we're dealing with a behavioral issue where we keep feeding ourselves foods that also cultivate the craving to have more of them. And so often the main one is sugar. But we can also be eating, it's why I joked the way I said earlier. It took me until I was 37, I think, to learn I don't have celiac, but I had a huge sensitivity to wheat, to gluten. And so I ate more and more of it because that's how it showed up as craving. And sugar's obvious, candy. And then dairy is similar too. And now we're getting into a whole, in my head, not in your head, but in my head, where I just went and visited, is um, our our entire food production here is so over processed, over the soil is so over developed that there's no nutrients left. So we're also craving something that's going to feed us anyway. It's food is really a huge issue in this culture, and I think that it's such a gift that you're touching on it in this way. It's just such a gift. And so we push it away with anorexia, and that's self-image as well, or with bulimia, how could I be such a horrible person? I need to purge. There's just so many layers and layers and layers.
Yeah, I think it's important to also, thank you for that. I think it's also important to touch on the fact that, and you kind of mentioned this, the abuse of food creates a similar release in the pleasure centers of the brain, producing dopamine. And if you've ever been in treatment, you've been lectured about dopamine up the yin yang. Really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like Gabor Mate says, so succinctly, don't ask why the addiction,
Mhm.
why the pain.
Amen.
We're trying to bury this pain because it's not acceptable in this culture to not be cheerful.
That goes, I mean, you hear men and women say this exact same thing, and as a man, you're like, everybody says just shove your emotions down. As a woman, the same thing happens. There's the same disconnect of how the way I feel can potentially create conflict in my life, and then I don't want to feel that anymore, so I need to remove it in some way, shape, or form. And I'm going to wrap this up because I think we're at a great point to do that. Karen, you finished it off really, really well. I want to absolutely thank you three for having the courage to show up and have this conversation. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, from someone who does not understand this at all, but still knowing that, and this is from Antje because we've sat down and met Antje and had dinner with her, and she's mentioned this to us before. So, like, this is something we knew, and we wanted her especially to come on here because we know a little bit of her struggles, and that helps. But I think that this conversation is going to absolutely make a lot of other women feel a lot less alone in their silence. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Antje,
Yeah.
for showing up and giving us your time and your hearts today. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm
Thanks
so
for having us.
to be here. What a gift to be with all of you.
Likewise, we really appreciate you guys. You know, it's not just the women that are silently struggling that need to hear this conversation, but it's everybody out there who's going to listen to this because there are regular listeners and they listen every week who have never heard a conversation like this, who maybe, like Steve said, they know or they don't know someone. This helps all of the other people who aren't struggling with eating have so much more compassion for the people who are. And I think that's something that we can all really hold on to and really, really be grateful for that you guys have given us that perspective also.
Amazing.
Thanks for listening today. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe or follow Through the Glass Recovery podcast and drop a rating or review to let us know what you think. We're so happy to have you here, and we'll see you again next Monday.